I've been putting on fire.
Yes, it is the MBT-70, the coolest tank ever devised by man. He says Musashi, and the MBT-70 really is the coolest tank. It's my favorite tank. I just love this thing. I think you'll love it too after you get done watching this video. To prove it's the coolest tank in the world, I prepared something special for you here.
His snow globe gets 24 inches of fresh powder annually. Regardless of temperature, you can never see his breath. His turducken consists of a duck inside a chicken, inside a turkey, back inside the original duck. He has never relied on mistletoe. His New Year's resolutions would blow your mind. That's why he doesn't tell anyone. He is the reason those 9 ladies are dancing. One should never shake his gifts. Just trust me on this one. He is the most interesting man in the world.
Do you not want to be that guy? Isn't that awesome? That guy's unbelievable. I really, really want to be that dude at that moment in that tank at that time. That's so cool. I mean, the whole outfit, it was in the 70s. It was so good. Oh, man, I'd love to figure out who that guy is and whatever happened to him. The coolest man in a tank ever. Welcome aboard to Let's Play Armored Warfare. Again, my name is Musashi. That was a very long intro because this is a long video. This is the MBT-70. That is in the game as a premium tank, which I'm tickled about because that means we all get to play it without too many hassles. Okay, I'll slow down. So there's no gameplay footage. This is taken before the EA, second stage of EA has started, so there is no MBT-70 to play at this stage of the game yet. There was in the early alpha. No gameplay footage, so if that's what you want, you may skip to the end. There's basically 2 camps for the MBT-70. There's half the people generally think it's the coolest thing ever, and why oh why didn't it actually get produced? And the other side thinks it's the poster child for government waste, bureaucracy bloat, government taxpayer dollar debacle. In this case, it was 2 governments because it was a joint project between Germany and the U.S. One of its big problems, by the way. So, you know, it's not always black and white, but the tank is always viewed in those 2 lights typically. Well, I've already told you I think it's cool as all get up, but that doesn't mean that I'm not aware of its problems or I can't see both sides of it. So what I'm going to do in the video here is show you about the vehicle that you get to play in Armored Warfare. But also, I'm going to talk about the things that are really cool, but then why some of those things in real-life tanking terms are really uncool. So we'll look at both sides of the coin here. Okay, first a little quick history. MBT-70 means Main Battle Tank 1970. It was started in the early 60s. First prototype, I think, was produced in 1965. The whole program had been closed by 1971, so it was relatively short-lived despite the enormous costs that went into the development of this tank. Basically, it was the downfall of the tank was really the communication between the Germans and the Americans. The Germans were on metric, Americans weren't. It sounds silly, but that was a lot of the problems they had just communicating between the two of them and having prototypes be made in both countries, which is what happened. There is, the one you're looking at the screen now is the one at Aberdeen. There's a pretty nice one left. That's the Aberdeen one there. There's another one up in the Northeast at a little museum. That's one of the early prototypes with one of the really early soft armor skins. It's a complete rusted wreck that's just sitting out, getting more rusted every year. The Germans have one that's quite nice. It is in a nice little museum, covered up, and it's in great shape. The German model did differ in a couple of key areas. I won't get into that. That's just entirely too long to get into. But the German one was called the KPZ-70, or Kampfpanzer 70, which my German is not very good. I spent 7 years in Germany. It ought to be better. But it's kind of like when I saw The Terminator, I was in Germany, and when Arnold says, "I'll be back," I saw it in German, and Arnold did his own voiceover for that. And it's "Ich komme wieder." Sounds really good, but Kampfpanzer 70 doesn't sound all that sexy. So we are going to call it MBT-70 from now on, regardless if it's the German or the American version. Some of the reason I love the MBT-70 is because it was ahead of its time. It's considered the grandfather of the M1 tank. And since I was an M1 tanker, I've always loved the MBT-70 because you really can see where the M1 didn't just pop up out of the blue. And wow, look at that. That's so cool. Like, it's got a turbine engine and all this stuff. Laser rangefinder, thermal imaging sights, all that stuff is all on the MBT-70. It was amazingly groundbreaking at the time. It had those features and more. One of the really cool and more features was the hydro-pneumatic suspension system. As you can see on the picture there, it was a kneeling suspension system. And the suspension system allowed it to go from a height of 8 feet 6 inches down to 6 feet 6 inches, which allowed it to get an excellent hold-down position. It was even lower profile than the Leopard 1 at the time. So this thing went from the M60, one of the tallest tanks ever produced, which is not a combat advantage, to a ridiculously low height that conferred a significant combat advantage to be able to get that low and be hold down. It's just amazing. And it was canceled in large part due to the costs of the program, the sort of never-ending money pit of sorts. But when you look back at it now, I don't think that the tank can be slighted for its cost for the program, because so many of the systems were not only revolutionary, but they then found their way into the M1 tank. Now, this is going to sound overly dramatic, but I partly love the MBT-70 and don't give a darn about what it cost back in 1969, because the tech then was inserted into the M1, and the M1 is a lot of the component parts: thermal imaging sight, laser rangefinder, stabilization system. I mean, there's so much of the MBT-70 that was then inserted into the M1. I was in the Battle of Medina Ridge in the Gulf War, as some of you know, and there's 300 enemy tanks, and we're lined up. It's the biggest tank battle since World War II, and again, this might seem overly dramatic, but I totally credit the MBT-70 and its expenditures and its tech for saving my life, basically, or at least it might have. Our advantage in the Gulf War was the tech that the M1 offered, and the tech came from the MBT-70. So you'll never hear me talk about how it was wasted money. Now, it's not all peaches and cream. I mean, I get it. But still, let's talk about some of the general components, and you can see that there's a lot of good and some bad thrown in here. The engine used a Continental AVCR V12 diesel. It produced 1,470 horsepower, and so that made this thing fast. Its power-to-weight ratio was excellent, and it could do 43 miles per hour. The T-62 at the time could only do 30 miles per hour. That's 69 kilometers per hour for the MBT-70, 48 kilometers per hour for the T-62. So this thing was just fast, but even more than that, it could go backwards just as fast. And that's what you saw in the first video. The backwards speed was just crazy good. They've even have the driver station positioned so he can drive that far back. We'll talk about that here in a second. But one of the other things that's like a real-life tanker concern is that the engine could be pulled and swapped out in 15 minutes. What you're looking at on the screen now is the German, the one in the German museum. So it's in much better shape. So there's a lot of differences now technically between the two versions, but at least you get to see roughly what the MBT-70 looked like in the States in a much nicer form. So the main gun it used was the XM150, 152 millimeter gun / launcher, because it could fire normal tank rounds as well as the Shillelagh missile. It was an improved version of the XM81. That's the gun that was used on the Sheridan and the M60A2 Starship. So it was a longer barreled version of it that was supposed to be improved, but it still had a lot of problems with utilizing both normal rounds and missiles. It was actually quite capable of firing missiles just fine. It was when you swapped out the ammunition. So you can see on the screen, that's the test firing of the Shillelagh missile from the MBT-70. But it had a revolutionary conventional tank round as well. It was the XM578 APF-SDS. It's armor-piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding sabot. I've talked about that in other videos. So the new round used more tungsten alloy, so it was a more dense round. But then they made it caseless, and caseless caused all sorts of expansion problems and problems when you're firing missiles and conventional rounds. So it's a very common thread that runs through the MBT-70 program. It was just too much of everything. I mean, it was awesome that they came up with all this new stuff, but they kept taking everything to the sort of fantasy degree of what they could get away with. And in the end, that's partly what doomed it. One of the things that allowed such a low profile was the use of an auto-loader. And the autoloader could load both the missile and the regular round. Now, there were lots of reports of problems with it, but it's pretty impressive to me the thing could even have any chance of loading a missile and a regular main gun round. They're quite a bit differently shaped. The turret and crew compartment was another strength of this tank. The crew members were within close proximity of each other and could work well together. That wasn't true of the M60A2 Starship or the Expeditionary tank. One of its real big weaknesses was the crew placement in that thing. But in this case, this turret also had, or the tank had, a layer of protection against neutron radiation and nuclear, biological, and chemical threats. This was, again, a Cold War era tank. And so it's got 15 to 20 centimeters of a protective layer around the crew compartment. So that also is another high-tech bit of real-world necessity for tanks these days. In my mind, the one big boondoggle of the MBT-70 was this 20mm anti-aircraft gun that it mounted just behind the driver's position. It was in this clamshell so that it could reduce the height of the tank when it would automatically, it was remote controlled, so it would go down in that little hatch there and then pop back up for use, but it never worked properly. It was overly complicated. It seems so cool to have a 20mm on your tank as well as your main gun and your coax. Just the idea of it just seems more like an engineer's wet dream than a realistic thing a tanker would really use. If you're under fire from the air, there's an aircraft after you, you are in big, big trouble. I do not like my chances, even if I've got a 20mm. Look, this isn't 1912 with biplanes. Even by the 1970s, they're going to be throwing munitions at your tank that you'll never ever see, even in the 70s. So this whole 20mm, it just gets massive buzzers from me about this tank. It's the only thing that just makes me just facepalm. But let's get back to a couple of the cool things. You know, I was telling you it had this V12 engine in it, but it also at one time had a turbine engine placed in it. They just couldn't figure out how to keep it up to its operational speeds with the dust that they were encountering and keeping that turbine free of dust. And that doesn't sound that crazy to us now because we're so used to the M1 having a jet engine as a propulsion unit. But think about that. This thing actually put a turbine in successfully. It's shaped very much like the M1. I mean, there's so many parts of it that are so M1 precursor-like. The fact that they couldn't figure out the dirt thing shows you that many of the MBT systems, maybe even the autoloader, maybe other items, maybe not the 20mm, could have been fixed with a little more time, maybe obviously more budget-conscious people controlling the program, because the M1 uses a turbine. Well, how'd they figure that out? Well, I can tell you, having spent a lot of time cleaning out the air filters in an M1, it is definitely a concern for the tank. You know, I was in two different deserts in the M1. I was in the Mojave and also in the Arabian Desert. And what you have to do, you have to keep your air filters clean all the time. So its consumption on fuel is what it's always sort of blamed for being a gas hog, and its operational range is reduced because the HEMTs or the fuel tanks have to follow up behind you with their aircraft fuel. But people frequently forget that from a maintenance standpoint, we had to stop relatively frequently during the Gulf War to blow our air filters out. Now, your performance will degrade. It's not like the tank is going to stop. But you'd have to get out on the back deck, and the air filters were sort of wedged in like pieces of pie. And they're pretty heavy when you took them out of there because they were full of a lot of dirt. And there was an air compressor system that the turbine would also run. And so you'd get a little hose, you'd pull out the air filters. The driver would always do this. That's why I was doing it. the driver will pull out the air filters, then you attach this hose, and then you just literally start blowing the hell out of it, and then the stuff just blows out, and then it's significantly lighter when you get done cleaning out the air filter, so you kind of know when you're done just by the sheer weight of the thing, and then you put the air filter back in. Now, I don't remember how many times we stopped during the actual combat operations. I think maybe once or twice I got out and cleaned out our air filters, like between Al-Basaya, we had an engagement in Al-Basaya, and between Medina Ridge, I definitely remember blowing out the air filters at that time. So you don't do it in combat, but you do it anytime you have a lull. So they did eventually go back to the diesel, of course, but the tech of doing the turbine was established for the MBT-70 originally. So remember our little friend here? Yeah, the reason this is cool is that no matter where the turret turns, see the driver stays looking forward? And that's also why he can drive backwards so fast, because he's quite high, so his vision when he's outside of his buttoned up position is very good. There were some reports that it was a little disorienting when the turret turned, but I'm not real sympathetic with that. The coolest man in the world should not have been getting disoriented. There's fighter pilots that do far more than just have to have the turret turn. So I'm not real sympathetic with the reports that it disoriented the driver. Toughen up, man up, guy. But it's so cool when you see that the function of that driver's thing. It's frequently credited as one of the ridiculously overly complicated parts of the MBT-70 that the driver's position would do that. But I think that's completely wrong. I think the fact that the driver was in the turret was one of the coolest and smartest things about the tank. So I'll finish the story with an M1 driver story. The most dangerous part of being an M1A1 crew member is the driver. There's no way it's not the driver. It's the driver because you're in the hull and the other three guys are in the turret. In the turret, there's a turret basket. There's a ring around the turret, a little white metal cage that spins around when the turret spins. And this thing can spin fast. And when you're in the driver's position, you also have a real sense of claustrophobia that you can't get out of that driver's position once you're in it, except under certain conditions. The turret has to have the gun tube over sort of the front left or right in just a certain position for you to crawl out of the driver's hole onto the top of the tank, where the vision ports are. You can't get out of there in many positions that the turret is turned to, because the back deck, you can't get out. There's not enough clearance to actually get out of it. And there's and also, so you can't get out through the front way, right? You also can't get out through the turret except when the turret is also turned a very certain way. The metal cage has a little door in it, so it's a little bit like the hamsters running through those little metal tubes. You got to sort of shimmy your way through that little thing, which is not easy. While you're attempting to enter the turret from the driver's position with the turret with the little hole open to you, you got to make damn sure that no one is going to move that turret while you're going through there, because you don't just hop out in 2 seconds. You got to sort of pull your way through there. And I always remember thinking you'd get like half your torso through there, and it always reminded me of Jaws when the guy gets chopped in half by the shark, right? I always was fearful that somehow that turret would just start turning without me. And in many cases, the power was on, the tank commander's in the tank, and you'd have to say to the tank commander or whoever was moving the turret, say, I'm getting out of this damn driver's hole, don't turn that turret. Now, you wouldn't go on and on about it because you did it so frequently. But there'd have to be great care taken that turret would not turn while you were exiting the vehicle. But even if you were in the driver's position, that thing spinning around is pretty disconcerting having it happen right behind you. Just trust me, it was real scary. And so the MBT-70 solved that problem with the driver's ability to always look where he was driving, even though the turret was turning, without having to be subjected to being chopped in half like in Jaws. So it's just a brilliant design. Well, I'm just really excited to get the MBT-70, get in the game and playing this thing. It just looks fun in the game. No matter whatever technical difficulties this tank had, I'm still going to give it 2 thumbs up for possibly saving my life. And also, it looks to be possibly one of the most fun tanks that we'll be able to purchase as a premium tank in Armored Warfare. Thanks again for watching Let's Play Armored Warfare. This is Musashi, and I'm going to leave you with one more fun little tidbit. Thank you, and I'll see you again next episode.
Stay thirsty, my friends.